Welcome to At the Table, a podcast by the Ohio Leadership Advisory Council. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Lolli, co-director of OLAC. This is a space where Ohio education leaders come together to explore timely and relevant topics shaping leadership, learning, and school improvement across the state. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or classroom teacher, there's a seat for you here. Let's get started. Today, my guests are two great literacy experts, Rachel Murdoch, who is the Director of Curriculum and School Improvement in Trotwood Madison City Schools. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being here today. And Rebecca Davis, who's an Assistant Principal in Hamilton City Schools. But I must say, Becky, that you were also in the central office as a curriculum coordinator in another school district. So you have great literacy expertise to share with us today.
Thank you.
Before we start with a conversation about literacy, could you tell us a little bit about some of the exciting things that are happening in both of your districts?
So I think the most exciting thing for me right now is our focus on early literacy, because we do see literacy as a continuum. If we get it right for the early kids, we're going to get it right through grade 12. So we've put many initiatives in place. Certainly we have looked at aligning our curriculum vertically, especially with that focus on foundational skills and making sure that all teachers are on the same page and teaching core. And we have seen some great improvements from that. For the first time this year, we are going to have a first grade class moving to second grade with only 25% in the red. And that's really flipped the number. The last few years, it's been 75% in the red. So that's the class of 2036. We're very excited about them.
That is really exciting. That's a great flip too. Mm-hmm. And that's what we all hope for, is to make sure we put that real high positive number at the top and the lower number, and then continue to reduce that lower number.
Yes.
That's great. That's great.
Wonderful. In Hamilton, we've adopted a new curriculum that we are slowly phasing into elementary. We started at upper elementary and are seeing great gains in our state test scores in literacy, specifically in writing. And then we've rolled that out in K2. And this year, we really focused on getting that in place, focusing on fidelity of curriculum. And next year, we're going to be really focusing on writing. How do we bring writing into the content, knowledge, learning that's happening in literacy? And then also utilize our science and social studies teachers in the upper grades to really build background knowledge for students and build a cohesive program with literacy and content together. And so that, coupled with our MTSS process, is a big focus for us. I had the opportunity to serve on our intervention team in the district this year, and we next year are going to be rolling out some consistent interventions across the district, along with decision rules for teachers to use and MTSS teams to use to determine what interventions are best for students. And we're really excited about that.
That's a great opportunity for all the students. You said something really interesting, something that's kind of contrary to what typically happens. You started with your intermediate on the change, and you pushed it down instead of starting with your early primary and pushing it up. Can you talk a little bit about the reasoning for that?
Yes. So in primary, we had already put in some new phonics and phonological awareness pieces that the teachers were learning. And at the time, we felt it was just too soon to then also put more a new curriculum on them that focused on the additional literacy standards. So we felt like it was more appropriate to then use that in 5th and 6th, then phase in 4th, and then 3rd, so that we're working our way down. And it's been a learning process, but it's been very beneficial to our teachers to have that structure to lean on.
Very different process. Yeah, it's very different. You know, literacy's always been a focus of mine from the moment I walked into a classroom. It's always been something that's been really important to me. But a lot of times, whenever I would try to talk about literacy in all classrooms, or talk about literacy, over and over and over again, because that really was a focus, people would look at me and go, there are going to be some kids who can't read. There are going to be some students that just don't get it. Can you talk a little bit about your belief about how important literacy is? Is it as important as Libby Lolli made it to be in her career? Mm-hmm. Is it less important in that? Is there something else that we should be focusing on? Why? Why are we doing all this literacy work?
I truly believe what you believe, which is literacy is the key to everything that students need to unlock knowledge, to unlock confidence. And I think that, as we're looking at how students learn to read, some of those missing pieces were students were struggling with decoding or struggling with multisyllabic words. So they weren't comfortable with the decoding, so then they're struggling with comprehension, they're struggling with literacy at a higher level. So I truly believe that it is critical, it is important to everything that students do during their academic careers.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I was recently at the Read Ohio Literacy Conference, and I heard a speaker say if they understand what they read, they'll remember the knowledge. And so reading is the key to knowledge as we move into secondary courses, and knowledge is the key to reading. Those are reciprocal. So with our staff, we've tried to really reinforce that. And one of the ways we've done that is in identifying as a source of high quality student data, map vocabulary acquisition for all our teachers, regardless of what they teach, because every teaching content area has critical content vocabulary. Every content area has a vocabulary standard, whether it's directly stated or implied. So we've really tried to reinforce that with our teachers, that this vocabulary builds the background knowledge that all students need to read, regardless of what grade level.
And having worked in an urban school district, the vocabulary that a student comes in with sometimes is very, very limited. And without that vocabulary and the ability to actually then, when you're reading and moving through the words and not understanding that vocabulary and having that depth of information about the words, it stops the student. It stops the student significantly. And Rachel, you were an AP teacher and also a regular English teacher in an urban school district. How did you make sure that the vocabulary development, because we're already at 9th grade by the time they get to you, it's not like we're having young children come in and be in Becky's classroom as a kindergarten teacher, as an early primary teacher, and she's able to really pump up that vocabulary. What do you do about that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because I feel like that's something I really had to work on as we shifted to opening our AP classes to all of our urban students. And I had to move from being an assigner of reading to a teacher of reading. But specifically with vocabulary, I did then look at every text to identify words that I was sure that were going to trip students up. So we would start with those, not just definitions, but how to pronounce them, some PSYOP strategies like listen to me pronounce it, you pronounce it, building that decoding fluency that many of them still lacked, so that they could understand those words and some of the concepts before we got to the actual reading, so that those weren't barriers.
And you did an outstanding job. Whenever I would observe you teaching,
Yes.
Either one of you, both outstanding teachers. So I appreciate you sharing that information. We've been around a long time, probably me longer than both of you, but we've seen reading trends come and go. We've seen whole language that was rolled out. We've seen 4 blocks that was rolled out. We've seen balanced literacy that was rolled out. We saw a push at one point in time for just pure phonics instruction. I mean, we had training all over the state, and we had to do phonics, and we had big notebooks that we were required to teach, all of that at one point in time. And then many of us continued to try and take the 5 pillars of reading, which, we were working on those and had been in each one of those pieces and parts. And then the science of reading. Can you talk about some of those overlapping trends and how they now reflect what we're trying to do with all the science of reading work that the state's doing?
Absolutely. As a person who was a kindergarten teacher when we worked together in another district, and through the shift of some of those pieces, the biggest thing that I could say is that focus on the systematic sequential phonics instruction really came to the surface through my teaching career. So, we had the building the joy of reading, building that comprehension, the pillars, the vocabulary, but we really we're working to beef up phonics instruction and that true understanding of how phonics develops so that it's not something that just kind of comes depending on the book that you're teaching or using. It's what is the true sequence where children master these phonics skills, and the same thing with phonological awareness. What is the sequence that students develop with their phonological awareness? So I've seen in these different trends, there are pieces that do overlap, but that intentionality really sticks out to me, as a person who worked at that district level, also thinking about looking at the programming that we had in place and then determining what gaps there were. That was something that I would see is how is that intentionality of phonics laid out in our curriculum. And I feel like it's important to understand that the science of reading isn't saying phonics only. We need both sides of the reading rope. We need both sides of that simple view of reading equation. Those two pieces together are going to equal skilled reading. We have to have the comprehension, we have to have the language, or we have to have the word recognition as well. So I feel like that's what we worked on at the district level to develop with professional development is understanding the foundational skills and the way that they develop, and then really giving teachers the why of this is research-based, this has evidence behind it, this is why we need to do it, and then giving them the tools to do it. Because that could also be something that was missing in the past too, is teachers might try to go out and find their own materials. Mm-hmm. And that really lacked cohesion across districts, across buildings in a district, when teachers are having to find their own things. So I feel like as a teacher, as a district leader, as a building leader, really making sure that teachers understood the why, the shifts that needed to be made and why they needed to be made, and then giving them the tools and resources and training to support those things are critical in building the case for some of these literacy shifts.
Right, yeah. And I agree with all of that. And I'll start with the tools, like making sure that teachers have the tools they need and that they're using those tools. And we definitely found a lot of like looking on Teacher Pay Teacher and with genuine like wanting to do well for kids, but finding that sometimes that meant below grade level. And specifically speaking of secondary, that lack of confidence in what students could do and learn, whether it was well-intentioned or not, was doing them a disservice. And I think some of that did come as we shifted into the 21st century, which I know we're a quarter of the way in now, but when we shifted into this idea of 21st century schools, and we had to be on the computer, and students had to be doing everything online, and I think that's where we lost some ground in secondary reading when we got away from print. So one thing I appreciate very much about the science of reading modules from the state of Ohio is that focus back to the science of print, and the value of reading in print and then writing about what you read. So that's a trend I see coming back. It's a trend that we are definitely capitalizing on in Trotwood to have that practice in print when we know the brain's going to slow. There's going to be more thinking while you're reading, processing while you're writing. That's going to build that understanding and comprehension, that side of the rope that has to always be there.
And you both have mentioned writing. Let's talk a little bit about why writing is necessary. Why is it important? Because when I was growing up, we didn't write a whole lot. We might have written sentences. We might have written a paragraph or two here and there. We didn't really write. And then when I was teaching, when I was a young teacher, I remember story starters. I don't know if you remember those or not, but we'd put a story starter on the board. What was it like to be a hamburger with, pickles and mustard? No, I'm kidding about that. But what was your summer vacation? Or, tell us about your favorite sport. Those story starters were one-liners that really, I may or may not have had experience with it. And today, it's very different. And what do you think about that?
I think that is an important shift. When I was in the classroom, one of my favorite things to teach was writing. And people would always say, oh, I hate teaching writing. Teaching writing is hard. And I think teaching writing is challenging, and it can be messy sometimes because students are all different levels. However, when we look at the research, we see that when students are writing about what they have learned, they are taking things to the next level. They are taking what they have learned and they're synthesizing it. They're putting it into their own words. It's almost like when you get to that higher level and you can teach someone else about what you have learned. That writing piece is critical. And that's why I am excited about our work this year with professional development in Hamilton about writing in our core curriculum, and about the work that we're doing at my building level, where we're taking those science and social studies teachers and having them support some of that knowledge build from literacy. So often we see that students who struggle with writing and find it challenging to produce writing, they struggle with literacy in general, with generating complex sentences, with reading complex sentences. So when we're coupling that writing instruction with our core literacy instruction, we're really making a clearer path for students to access both the reading comprehension portion and the writing portion of what's expected at grade level. So I think writing is critical.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a critical component for teachers to monitor students' thinking and what the barriers are for them, because it's really hard to judge comprehension from a multiple choice test, even though we do give plenty of multiple choice tests. But when a teacher is reading what a student wrote, then you can really follow that student's thinking. So where the thinking is on track, where the thinking has gone off track. And so when you are talking about intervening, you were talking about intervening earlier, we're going to see that in the writing more than we're going to see that in their multiple choice questions. So it's inherent that writing is a part of that. And I do think that writing and all that processing, that is where we really are leading students to, especially in secondary, that college and career readiness, because it's not enough to get them to college. We have to get them through college. They have to have that problem solving, processing skill that comes with writing.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Becky.
One of the pieces that I was thinking about that came to mind as you were talking was an early piece that kind of came out when we worked together at the district level, was the importance of handwriting fluency. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that is something that I feel like was a shift that has, when you were talking about shifts earlier, has kind of gone, it was important and then it wasn't focused on as much. And then when I was in the classroom, it wasn't something that we focused on a lot. And then you came to our district and we started looking at how we could increase, you know, intentionality of handwriting and penmanship instruction. And then as we have been doing, you know, science of reading work, it really shows that when students have automaticity with penmanship, with handwriting, it lessens that cognitive load of actually putting letters down on paper. And I think sometimes it's just really interesting to go back, and when you're thinking about, you know, getting all the way up to a student who's working on college and career readiness, all the way back to really focusing on handwriting fluency at those earlier grade levels, it all fits together and it all works to build a literate student who's able to produce writing.
I agree. And I think that research and the evidence on handwriting is so interesting. When I was an AP reader, students were still handwriting their essays. I'm still a little sad that's going to change, because I do think you could tell those students who were confident in that writing. And there was, I believe, some research at the time that said students who were writing in cursive tended to score higher. You know, they did have that fluency of handwriting. So I think
interesting
that we could probably go back even a little further on that trend.
Yeah. And it was really interesting to me about the penmanship piece, because it was major whenever I was teaching, early teaching. It was a major part of what we did every day. You know, I was at the time, that particular year that I'm talking about, I was in third grade teaching, and I was in charge of my class learning cursive. So every day we're practicing a specific letter in cursive. You know, they had come up with good manuscript skills and all of that. And then as time went on, we weren't doing it anymore.
Right.
But it's interesting that it's in the state's plan.
Yes.
And when it was put, you know, I continued to, as a curriculum director and as a superintendent, continued to really push that penmanship piece, because I felt like it was important. And sometimes I felt very dated because I was still pushing penmanship. But I felt it was very important. And then when the state came out with it, with their last strategic plan for literacy, I thought, oh, good, I'm not so dated, you know, and we've been doing what we should be doing along the way. So that was really gratifying to see that all that work that had been done all those years was important and appropriate. You know, principals have a task where they have to know everything that a teacher's doing as far as instructional practice, all those high yield strategies that we talk about, all the appropriate ways to lesson plan and to prepare. And now science of reading, they have to be an expert in that because we have OTES too. And they have to make sure that the data are, available there. We're using teacher data for evaluation purposes. So they have to really be able to supervise and guide this work. They have to be able to. What kinds of things have your districts done to make sure that a principal understands that science of reading is different than just using a basal reader where I open it up and I assign the lesson? What has your district done to teach them the differences and to teach them the information, knowledge, skills that they need to have for this whole science of reading process?
I would say two things we've done. One is to make it non-negotiable that teachers will use the adopted materials, those curriculums, so they know what they're looking for. We've updated our pacing guides. We have aligned them to essential standards so that they know what they're looking for when they go into classrooms. And we're there to support them as well with that. But as part of that, we have had a district-wide writing initiative similar to what you were talking about in your district, which we have monthly meetings with principals. We have a district leadership team that follows the meeting with principals, and then we meet with instructional coaches. So that's an intentional sequence. So with principals, we'll roll out what we're doing with writing. That includes like sharing graphic organizers, having them practice themselves with the graphic organizer, sharing rubrics, having them score samples so that they really know what they're looking for. Then we'll do the same thing with the district leadership team, so then principals have seen it twice. And then we share the same thing with instructional coaches, so they reinforce what the principal's saying in the building. And we have seen in some of our buildings, some progress in all of our buildings, but great progress in a few of our buildings where those writing scores have really gone up. This year, when we were looking at our initial scores, we were really exciting, sometimes going from an average of 2.3 on a writing passage to 4.9. So we feel that that's very exciting progress.
That is. That's really exciting progress.
Yes. In our district, we have done something similar where as a assistant principal, I have had the opportunity to attend science of reading trainings at the educational service centers. And then we do have coaches in our building as well. And so often when the coaches are delivered professional development, we receive that information as well. And also our coach will come back and share that with us. So I think it is critical to keep building administrators knowledgeable and aware of what the expectations are, because then we are the ones evaluating teachers, supporting teachers, and we need to be able to have those tools to do that. So I feel like a lot of the trainings have included that why that we talked about, and then also how to implement the standards themselves. So in addition to overall science of reading training, we also have received training in that curriculum that we adopted so that we can see how those pieces all fit together. How is it different from, a typical basal or those teachers, pay teachers, things that people may have been finding on their own. And then we can help support by pointing out, like, where's the explicit instruction happening? How do all these tools work together to put instruction in place that teaches supporting the science of reading.
That's interesting that you mentioned explicit instruction. How does that work in a science of reading classroom? What is the explicit instruction that happens?
I think it's the modeling, it's the practice, it's that scaffolding and support that is so critical for students to learn. I was laughing. We were on vacation with my family last week, and my mom, we went to do mini golf, and my mom noticed I was not great at mini golf. And so she said, well, hold on, watch me do it. Okay, so now it's your turn. Here's what, let's do it together. Here, let me show you. And then now you try it. She is not trained in education, but she had I said, Mom, that is explicit instruction. You just used the gradual release of responsibility. So I think it really follows when you're delivering strong instruction, it's that modeling, it's the guided practice, and then it's releasing students to practice independently. And that aligns with the phonemic awareness practice that we're doing, with phonics practice that we're doing, and then through the other side of the equation with those comprehension and language pieces as well.
Yeah, I agree about the modeling being critical. And I think at the secondary level that modeling includes some read alouds. Yeah. And even if you're not going to read aloud the whole passage, if the teacher takes the time to prepare and pick the most important paragraphs in a passage and then model that reading aloud, model the thinking, then our students are going to benefit from that greatly. And yes, I can't say enough. And I will say too, because we do have adopted curriculum, and sometimes our teachers feel they are a little too scripted. And so we try and in our training show them that there's still much preparation for you to do and to create and to anticipate what your students need. And we had a coach in our early literacy building or early childhood building who observed that while the lesson called for students to get on the computer, our students, because they have a lot of screen time already, would have benefited more from being on the carpet. So just saying that to teachers didn't create a change. So she went in and modeled that herself. She prepared the lesson, called the students to the carpet. Let's see what it really looks like. And that's what made the shift in the instruction.
I do think that
so modeling for teachers too.
Yes. And I do think it's important, you kind of touched on this, when we do have a prescribed curriculum that we are to use, still supporting teachers with understanding where that craft comes in, where their decision-making comes in, so that they feel empowered, that they can bring the curriculum to life, that they can truly take what's there and then bring it to students in an exciting way. That's what they bring to the table.
When you think about the professional development that you used, and think about our audience, what would you recommend to them that you use that seem to be very effective in moving your classrooms forward with the science of reading? What type of professional development, what specific resources might you have used that you felt had a great impact?
So one resource we used was using the company itself, the publisher of our foundational curriculum. They came in and did the initial training, but then we also engaged them to come in and do some implementation visits where they went into classrooms, watched a teacher implement the training, and then gave individual feedback to the teacher. And I think that was particularly meaningful because they really got just that individual attention on what they were doing well, what they could still improve in their instruction. So I think just taking that extra step of, we didn't just tell you how to do it, but now we're going to come and give you feedback on your own implementation. I also think the science of reading modules have been very valuable for all our teachers. Now, most of our elementary teachers did letters training, so we were a little ahead of the game on the science of reading training, but most of our secondary teachers did not. So they have done those science of reading modules. Those are very good. What we found though is let's go back to those modules and do some of that some mini trainings with our teacher-based teams, with our DLT again, with our principals, so that we keep reinforcing that message.
Similarly to what you said and what we touched on earlier, I think what has worked well in districts I've been in is making sure that your leadership is well trained in the research and the materials, and then there has to be an ongoing professional development plan. And it sounds like that's what you all have in place as well. It can't just be, what I've seen be unsuccessful is a one-off professional development session and then we don't do anything else with it. There has to be the presentation of professional development and then follow up informally or at the building level. In our case, our coach does backwards planning with the teachers. So we're lucky to have someone right there, in the trenches, planning with teachers, dropping in and modeling, supporting them, and then another more formal presentation where we then come back together and either reinforce something we've done before or dive deeper. And I think that when you are working on your professional development plan, it has to be long-term. You have to look at where do we want to be ending up and how do we get there, and then breaking it up into bite-sized chunks along the way with pieces of accountability as well. So whether that's teachers observing each other, we've done some of that in our building as well. And teachers have felt confident and comfortable, observing each other or saying someone could come observe them. Sometimes we will choose one focus area. So last year, a district focus was eliciting student responses. So in our building, we said, okay, we want to come in and see just a snapshot of you utilizing written response strategies with students. And either I or the principal or one of our coaches would come in and observe that and then leave a little feedback. So I think that zeroing in on that one specific piece was beneficial as well for really moving things forward.
And you both have talked a little bit about coaching, about teacher leadership. You both have formal models of coaching in your districts. Could you talk a little bit about what that model looks like? Because there are several different kinds of models for teacher coaching or teacher leader type positions. Could you talk a little bit about the models that are in your district right now?
I would say for our coach, the focus is them being in the classroom supporting teachers. So it can range from, it depends on where the teacher is themselves. So there are some teachers who may be new teachers and they're engaging in a very formalized coaching cycle where, the coach is coming in and modeling, then the teacher is putting something into place and the coach is observing them, and then they meet frequently. We do have it set up in our building that each teacher meets with a coach once a month. And sometimes it may look like something different. Maybe they will say, I would like to work on something more specific, assessments. Can we look at student assessment? So it can really sometimes range on what the teacher needs. But another non-negotiable, though, that I mentioned a minute ago was that backwards planning. So that's another time that coaches meet with our teams, in addition to that individualized time where they're looking at the end of our modules of this new curriculum, and then they're planning, how are we going to get there?
Yeah, and so we have some similarities. Our coaches definitely are in classrooms, and that's where we expect them to spend a lot of their time. We also expect them, though, to be the liaison between the curriculum department and the building initiative. So as I mentioned before, that's why we meet with them monthly. We make sure we're all on the same page in sharing what those initiatives are. They take it back to their teacher-based teams to make sure they have the right understanding, and there's a lot of communication back and forth. We also ask our coaches to take a lead in tracking their building data. So most of them have data rooms where they're really tracking how students are moving. And I've mentioned our young ones, our early learning center before, but we actually have a district coach, and then we have a coach from the Read Ohio initiative who work together. And they have a whole room of circles on boards that represent kids. And it's nice to see those overlap in circles where you see a circle turn from red to yellow to green.
Yeah. It's great.
And when we think about people that haven't really initiated full-blown science of reading yet, what piece of advice or what sequence of events might you suggest for them as they begin that journey?
I would say one piece of advice I would give is children can't wait until all the adults are ready. We have to make this change now. And that's one thing that I have reiterated in my district. My superintendent feels the same way. Our children have been waiting long enough. So we are going to start, we're going to initiate this, and we're going to keep pulling all the adults on board.
Great advice.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
I love that. And I think it goes back to the training piece. You have to establish that why. And then, like you said, this is what we're doing. We're moving ahead, but you have to support everyone along the way. So it can't be enough that we just say, this is what we're doing. So I do enjoy, that we have had those science of reading modules that everyone has had to complete, because then that did the work of establishing the why, establishing the knowledge base for us to then build on as building and district leaders. But I think it's just critical teaching is so personal. And so we have to do that work and put in that time to show teachers why this is important and why this is what we're doing, and then move forward with here's what is expected. So those clear expectations along with those tools so that they have what they need to implement.
Great. Before I close with both of you, are there early results that you've seen from the literacy work that you've been doing? Rachel, you named some of the early results so far. Are there others that you want to share or brag about?
I think those are our most significant with our first to second graders, and then with our writing scores, that's really where we've had a focus, and those are our most significant gains. I will say though, we did have gains in most of our subjects and content areas this year, and I think that does go back to reading because it's important in every content area. So I would attribute that to the science of reading as well.
That's great.
My school, Bridgeport, was a recipient of the Momentum Award this year from the
great.
state. So we felt very excited about that. And that's going to be part of our theme for next year, or going forward, building on the momentum that we have started. We are seeing huge gains in our DIBELS 8 data with our earliest learners. The shifts from students who are in that well below benchmark, that red, or in the below, that yellow, moving to benchmark and above by the end of the school year. K1 and 2 saw huge gains, and we are very excited about that because then that is going to lay the foundation for them to be able to be working and showing those results on future assessments.
That's
So
great.
we're excited about it.
I am so pleased that your literacy work is continuing and that you both are seeing great results with that. I can't thank you enough for sharing your expertise and your ideas and joining us here today. And thank you for joining us at the table. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Lolli, and it's been a pleasure to have you with us. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe and share with your colleagues. For more leadership tools and professional learning resources, visit ohioleadership.org. And until next time, keep leading with purpose.